After the modular mess that was the LG G5, the following year's G6 felt like a step in the direction of normalcy. Then came the camera-focused V30, which was easily one of LG's best phones ever. I bring this up because the company's newly unveiled G7 ThinQ feels like a familiar blend of G6 and V30, just with some new tricks and AI features folded in. Let's take a closer look. Right off the bat, this is clearly a G-series phone. It's a tall, slim, metallic rectangle with rounded edges and honestly little in the way of style or charm. It is fast though. There is a Snapdragon 845 chipset tucked away inside, along with 4GB of RAM, 64GB of storage, and a 3000 mAh battery. Really though, the most notable physical change here is the Google Assistant button on the left side. By pressing and holding it like you would a walkie-talkie, you can talk to the assistant without worrying about wake words. It's a nice flourish, and it's very similar to the Bixby button on the Galaxy S9s, but is this really necessary? I'm not sold. And check out this screen. It might look like a standard 6.1-inch display running at QHD+, but it does take some interesting cues from LG's TVs. In addition to the standard red, blue, and green subpixels, LG also added white subpixels to up the screen's overall brightness. The screen itself is pleasant enough to look at with relatively vivid colors and solid saturation, but the brightness is the big deal here. We're looking at 1000 nits when the boosted brightness mode is on, and it easily outdid the iPhone X and the Huawei P20 Pro in readability when we took it for a spin outside. If you're not a fan of that notch up top, however, just know that you have some options to deal with it. You can remove it altogether by hiding it with software, or you can actually make it a little prettier with gradients and color effects. Why? You know, just because. There's also a headphone jack here and one of LG's Quad DACs for high-resolution audio playback, but LG didn't just stop there. Since the phone itself is IP68 water and dust resistant, there's a lot of sealed space inside the phone's body. LG took that space and turned it into a resonance chamber of sorts to create one of the loudest speakers we've ever heard on a smartphone. So far though, the results have been pretty hit or miss. There's no question that the G7 speakers are louder than just about any other phone we've tested, but are they better? That really depends. If you're holding it in your hand, it's gonna sound pretty disappointing. Things improve a bit when the phone is sitting on a solid surface, but even then, some of the music we tested still sounded hollow and unsatisfying. Here's hoping the final versions are more consistently good. And then there are the cameras. This year we're working with an 8-megapixel front-facing camera, which does as well as you would expect, plus a pair of rear-mounted 16-megapixel cameras for wide and telephoto use. As usual, they provide a lot of flexibility when you're out shooting in the field. The wide-angle camera's view is a little more narrow than before to minimize distortion around the edges of the frame, but I didn't miss those extra degrees very much. Based off of our limited hands-on time, I wouldn't say that the image quality is going to knock your socks off, but the camera still captured a respectable amount of detail and some truly great dual-lens portraits. More importantly, an automatic night mode that activates in very dark situations did a surprisingly good job amping up the color and clarity of objects in almost pitch black. Here's hoping that holds up as well in real-world testing. As with the V30s ThinQ, the G7 ThinQ has some interesting AI tricks going on. LG's new AI cam feature tries to identify the objects and scenes in front of the camera so it can fiddle with the settings appropriately. In our limited testing, the phone did pretty well at identifying food and blue skies and people's faces for portraits and tweaking those resulting photos into something that felt a lot better than what they would have been otherwise. That said, sometimes the AI would automatically activate one scene mode when I was hoping for another, and it's this lack of consistency that makes it just kind of frustrating sometimes. This kind of AI-fueled auto mode is a fascinating, valuable concept, but for now, it seems pretty clear that LG's approach might still need some work. All told, consider us cautiously optimistic. The LG G7 ThinQ is a solid sequel to a phone we already really enjoyed, but some things, like the camera's AI and that love it or hate it speaker, still feel a little rough around the edges. For what it's worth though, LG says it's keen for feedback and plans to push multiple software updates with new features over time, so here's hoping some of these issues get ironed out soon.